All right, hello, those that are watching this recording. We're happy that you are watching this archive. And for those that are joining us live, thank you all for joining us. This is going to be a powerful, insightful conversation, and we are excited that you're here. So my name is Corey Gray. I am one of the panel hosts for this courageous conversation. And if you are here, you are interested in learning and listening a little bit more about testing and decision matters when it comes to race matters, testing, intelligence, and achievement. So those three buckets is what we're going to cover today. So we have a very established panel that we're going to introduce, and I'll start by introducing two of my personal colleagues here in Atlanta. So we have one, my school principal, David White, who is also APS Principal of the Year. He is the principal at Burgess Peterson Academy. He's been there 7 years?
8 years. This is 8.
8 years, but has been in education. He's a veteran in education and very experienced, and we're happy to have him today. How are you feeling, David?
I'm feeling great, Corey. Thanks for asking me to join your illustrious panel tonight. I'm happy to be with you guys. This is year 30 for me in public ed, and I'm happy to be a practitioner at the local neighborhood school level, and I'm happy to be the principal in the community where I also live. So it's a pleasure to be with you guys tonight.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you. So then moving forward, we also have our coordinator of gifted and talented education in Atlanta Public Schools, Mona Haygood, who is also with us, who oversees our entire gifted and talented program in Atlanta, but also oversees the renowned Xanadu Summer Camp, which is renowned throughout the state of Georgia and really throughout the Southeast in the country. So we're excited to have her as well. Mona, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Corey. Thank you so much for asking. And yes, it is Xanadu time of year. Xanadu is actually a summer enrichment program that was born out of the gifted endorsement. And really, we say that it is the place where gifted endorsement candidates really kind of do their gifted student teaching. And so we are open to students from all across the metro Atlanta area for 4 weeks in the summertime, when they really get to experience hands-on learning at its finest. I'm in my second year as gifted coordinator in Atlanta Public Schools. I've worked for the district since 2011-12, and I've been at the gifted office that whole time. But I will say, until you've walked a mile in a man's shoes. So though I've worked at the office, I haven't been the gifted coordinator, and my eyes and my work have been opened to what it means to lead this work. So thank you for having me.
We're excited for your expertise that you're going to bring to our panel. Thank you for being here. And then Angela, I'll let you continue with our introductions.
All right, I'm Angela Clayton. I'd like to introduce two of my colleagues. I'll start with Denise Cobb-Williams, who is the Director of Curriculum and Instruction in Walton County for our elementary schools. She's also a former principal. See, one of my principals. Well, I call her the best principal ever. And I will let you take it further, Denise. Oh, wait, is she muted?
All right, sorry, I'm here. Good evening. I am pleased to join this illustrious panel. I think this will be a professional learning opportunity for myself, being that I wear a couple of hats in my district. This is my 28th year in education. It is my 7th year, but I oversee gifted. I dabble in teacher evaluation. My major role is the elementary curriculum director, and I am very excited to join you guys. And like I said, I think I'm going to learn a lot. I'm already intrigued by Mrs. Haygood's summer program. Is something that I'm taking some notes on the side of something that hopefully we can maybe duplicate and implement here in Walton County.
Thank you, Denise. And I would also like to introduce Dr. Donna Major, another one of my amazing colleagues. Dr. Major oversees our psychologist, the RTI process, God bless you. 504, she is also a bulldog. Dr. Major.
Good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be on the panel with you all. Even though my area of expertise is not gifted. By trade, I am a school psychologist. My master's is in clinical psychology, but I graduated from UGA a couple of seasons ago in school psych. This is my 28th year as well in education. Most of that being a school psychologist and serving students K through 12.
Yes, we are excited to have both individuals from the district level and the local level. And then I will also introduce our last official panelists. We have the renowned Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings on the panel tonight. I do believe that if I were to read all of her accolades, all of her work, we would be well past our panel time. So I employ all those who are on the call, please research her work. Her work in culture responsive pedagogy and critical race theory is something that I feel like every single educator, no matter if you teach scholars who are culturally and linguistically diverse or scholars who may not be, it's whoever you teach. If you are a teacher, if you are not a teacher, please look up her work. She is amazing. And I think that we are blessed and fortunate to have her on the call. So Dr. Ladson-Billings, we are excited to have you, and thank you for taking your time to be with us tonight.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. All right. So then we also have two other co-hosts with us today who are going to start our conversation, and I'm going to pass the torch here to Lou. Lou, you can introduce yourself and then go ahead with your first question. Wait, you're on mute.
I'm back. Okay. So hey everyone, my name is Lou, and I'm a master's student for the ACD Applied ACD program, and there I'm a master's student. So as Corey said, I'm his classmate for this project, and I will just start with I guess simple question: what's everyone's favorite song? Anything? I'm open to anything. For me, I will start with. For me, I like Tchaikovsky violin concerto in D minor.
I will follow you. My favorite song in this context is "Wake Up Wake Up Everybody" by Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, because I think it speaks to where we are and what we do for a song that's so mature.
That's cool. Anyone else?
Well, my favorite song is typically my walk-on song. It's Hypnotized by the Notorious B.I.G.
That's interesting.
I knew I loved that.
Okay. Anyone else want to share a song? Maybe.
Just some rapid fire questions to break the ice a little bit before we dive into the head.
Anything early Whitney Houston, anything.
Wow.
I don't know if it's my favorite song, but I've used it before in schools. "Tell Me Something Good" by Shaka Khan.
Like it.
And I can't even remember who sings the song anymore, but I think it was Jam Master Flash, but it's "Don't Push Me Because I'm Close to the Edge."
Days are like that.
That was
Like
going to
a
be my
jungle
theme
sometimes. It
song
makes
when
me
I
wonder how I
opened
keep
a
them going
clinical
under.
setting.
It is like a struggle sometimes.
Yep. It makes me wonder how I keep them going under.
That's it.
Okay. Yep.
Thank y'all for sharing that. My name is Layla Jones. I'm an undergrad major at UGA, a sociology major. And I just wanted to know, like, what are y'all's guilty pleasures? This is a little personal. I would say mine might be these little chocolates that have like caramel in the middle. I just eat like 3 of them at night. And it's really, I don't know. I don't really have many. I'm sorry. But yeah. So Dr. White, what's one of your guilty pleasures?
No doctor here, just David. I appreciate that. I appreciate that raise though. My guilty pleasure is a nice couple fingers of bourbon on a Friday evening after a long week at school.
Yeah. Nice. Do you have those like at a bar or?
No.
Okay.
Here at home.
Getting really personal now.
Digging in, huh?
Okay. Dr. Major, would you like to share?
Anything chocolate with nuts.
Okay, that's fair. Like the Hershey's with the almonds, that was so good.
Hershey's, Baby Ruth, Snickers, Mr. Goodbar. Yes, I all of those.
All of them.
Does anybody else want to share their guilty pleasures? Dr. Billings?
I have since the pandemic, become addicted to a YouTube series called Twins: The New Trend, which are these two brothers who are twins who react to songs that I felt like they should have known those songs. So they react to things like Phil Collins' In the Air Tonight, which got a lot of reaction from other people. They've reacted to Boys to Men. They're going through the Michael Jackson catalog, a lot of Motown. So it's just fun to watch the songs that I've known all my life through their eyes.
Right. Different perspective. Yeah. Does anybody else want to share?
I love peppermints. I love peppermints. I love peppermints. I don't know why. It's like maybe it's a recent obsession. I love peppermints. They just make me really happy. But yeah, so thank you for that. We love getting to know our panelists a little bit and letting our viewers get to know you all a little bit more, so that as we discuss these things, they can see your responses through the lens of, you know, this person and not just this name in books or this name that we see on district websites. So as we continue, again, this is a courageous conversation. We have some questions geared around decision-making when it comes to race matters with testing, intelligence, and achievement. And the title of our session tonight is Gatekeeping. And the reason we came up with that title is, like I said before, we are both Angela and I, when we were discussing this and discussing the idea, we both are inspired by Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings' work. And the first book that I read in my preparation program was The Dream Keepers. And I remember having to cite that and doing so many book studies about it and just thinking about how we have so many teachers today throughout the world who are holding up the dream and really inspiring our educators. But yet there are also certain policies and procedures and mindsets that are in place that are also gatekeeping, that are keeping these scholars from thriving, keeping them from being, you know, their best selves. So with that being said, again, even though we are in this gifted and creative ed program, we also are educators. So we do see it from a broader sense of the term as well. So we'll start with a gifted question, but we do want to take it a little broader. So Mona, I do want to ask you the first question. And our question is, what do you feel like is the difference between giftedness and intelligence, and how does race play a role in that?
So if I have to answer straight, and really after you invited me and I accepted, I don't know that I felt equipped to really answer the questions that you sent. And so knowing that I am on a panel with such a well-read, well-informed group of people, what I want to preamble is saying that what I share here tonight is based on 20-something years of work in the gifted program. And so I got my gifted endorsement back in 1999. And I have what I know through practice. I am not that clinician. I've attended national conferences and local conferences and all of that. And so I believe that exposure makes all the difference. And so when we think about the exposure of minorities and different socioeconomic groups and minority groups, we know that based on family income, where students attend school, and the opportunities that they are exposed to through those two avenues, that they may not always be exposed to the things that will prick their minds to do what differently exposed children's minds will do for them. And so I guess I will give the typical answer in that I think that we are born with a certain amount of intelligence, but I believe that intelligence grows. Someone actually just asked me the other day if I myself was identified as a student in school, and I was not, but I know for a fact that my creativity has grown with my growth, exposure, age, and all of those things. And I know that I am the most creative person that most people know. You know, yes, there are people who are more creative than I am, but I know for a fact, yes, I started out with some creativity, but as I've grown and matured, so has that. And so I believe for students, then their intelligence will grow and change as they are exposed to things.
I value that point. And I see where you're coming from with that too. And I'm wondering, is there with any other panelists, if you wanted to expound on that point about the difference between this giftedness, where we have scholars who are labeled as gifted and talented, versus intelligence, and if there is a difference in your eyes, and how does race play a role in that?
Myself, like Dr. Haygood, my experiences will lie, not Dr. Okay, Mona Haygood, my experiences lie also with being a practitioner. But when Mona was talking, two things came to mind with me, and I'm a very transparent person. Sometimes that's to my default. And Angela can attest to this. We were having a conversation with someone who works here at the Board of Education, and basically was just saying, you know, it's genetics. That's what being gifted is all about. And having to almost just kind of take a step back to be like, oh my. And we had a colleague of mine who happened to be one of my classmates to come in to do some work with our gifted teachers. And I'm kind of spiderwebbing a little bit, but she put up two pictures of students. One student had great grades, I mean, picture perfect kid. The other kid had some trouble. I think eventually he like dropped out of school. And then, you know, you put up, which one would you refer to the gifted program? And everybody was saying the young lady was the one that they would refer to the gifted program. And really both of them were referred. And then when she let the cat, I guess, out the bag, they both were siblings. So they came from the same parents. So, I mean, even for me, that was even a step back. And I was like, ooh, I wish the person that we were having a conversation with here at the Board of Education could have been in there just for the profile of both kids. But at the very end, she was like, they're brother and sisters, and they were even twins. So then it kind of got the minds of our gifted chairs it really did. I think it resonated with them because a lot of what we do in our district, it starts with a teacher recommendation. But I think a lot of our teacher recommendations, you're looking for that cookie cutter kid. And my daughter was identified as gifted, and it took her until 4th grade to actually qualify for those services. And she is a very bright and intelligent child, and she's been exposed to a lot. And we go to museums, and I read to her earlier, we practice sight words and all of those things. But when you go to it, I struggle with nature versus nurture, and I feel like it's a little bit of both when you're trying to classify and identify students.
I think it's funny, Mr. Gray. I never call you Corey. I don't even know why I called you Corey in the beginning, but Mr. Gray, I think about the first activity that we have endorsement candidates do on the first night of the endorsement, and we ask them to define giftedness. And we go all night kind of battling out gifts versus talents and the areas that those gifts and talents fall into, what's measurable and what's not measurable. And then we extend from there into all the different theorists and their definitions of giftedness, and how many of those use the word intelligence versus talent versus gift versus nature versus nurture. All of those things play a part. And in the end, what we come back to in Atlanta public schools and really all across the state of Georgia is that there is no one definitive definition of giftedness. And because it could mean so many different things in so many different places, and if it's based on funding, and if it's based on service, and if the student is homeschooled or unschooled or whatever the scenario is that the child might find themselves, and really too, whatever the intended outcome is of the agency, you know, whether that's in educational institution, a university or college or a homestead situation, you know, what is that intended outcome? So we know that there's no one definition. And then when you add race on top of that, I think it just compounds all of those factors.
And Dr. Major, I thought you were going to say something too. Yes.
I totally agree with everything Ms. Haygood just said. It is depending on how it's defined. And when you throw race into it, that becomes a whole different issue because, and once again, and let me throw out an exclusionary, this is just Dr. Major's opinion. It doesn't represent everyone in school psychology or the Department of Education. But race, to me, is an economic definition. and it's for economic purposes. All of us, to me, are the same. We possess the same abilities and skills and different levels of talent. Is the exposure that we've been provided that really pulls on those different skills and talents that we may have. So race does play an impact because of the economic advantages or disadvantages a person has been able to experience. And how we define giftedness or intelligence is really wrapped around our purpose behind it. So to me, that's a very loaded question. But
I value all of that because I know that we've been studying with gifted education how in the United States, it really started around when like the Sputnik era was happening, when, you know, Russia and all these other countries were doing all these great things. We were like, well, what about America? We need to get our kids to do great things too. So let's have this gifted program. And then you think about the time period, how that was really close to the Jim Crow era and the civil rights era and all those different things, how some might see gifted education as a sense of segregation. We're going to take these certain students away and give them this great exposure, like you all said, to education, while leaving, you know, these Black students and these Latino students and Hispanic scholars, leaving them in the general classroom and not giving them that because they may not have been seen as, they didn't qualify for the gifted program. So there's a lot that's there to unpack, but like we said, we do value everyone's insight, and we know that there's not one answer, as you all said.
Yeah, I think I would add, I agree on all counts. I think we are really good in education at measuring and quantifying how well students have mastered particular bits of content, how well they respond to typical testing prompts. And I think that's one of the reasons we are dependent upon standardized testing, norm reference testing as those initial triggers for gifted referrals oftentimes. When I think of giftedness, I think of talents that are innate, but that children or adults nurture and develop over time based on their exposures, based on their interests, based on their opportunities and representation and lots of other things. We're not so good at measuring those bits. And so a lot of our kids are smart, right? A lot of our kids are really intelligent and do well on typical tests, norm reference tests, criterion reference tests, but they're not necessarily what I would consider gifted. They're just really bright kids, typically performing bright kids of every hue and creed. But I think we miss the opportunity to identify, especially at the elementary level, perhaps elsewhere. My life work has been in elementary schools. We're not as good as at noticing and identifying giftedness that doesn't look like I do well on tests. It's harder for us to quantify. It's harder for us to defend. It's harder for us to explain. Those parent conversations aren't as scriptable, right? It's murky, and I think that's where a lot of our progress needs to be made. Because a lot of our kids who get into gifted programs at schools like mine and the middle school that we feed into, it does sometimes seem as if the desire behind being identified as a gifted kid is for some separation, some specialness, some otherness, the opportunity for some kids to get extra stuff and extra attention, or to be tracked together when going to middle school and getting in the better math class or the harder science class or the advanced language class. And that bifurcation of opportunity broadens and widens as the kids get older and track through our system.
So I would just say, and I will confess, I have 55 years of education experience. So I've seen a lot for a long time. And I have traveled to 6 of the 7 continents, and I've been in schools in every one of those continents. This concept of giftedness makes no sense in most of the rest of the world. They say somebody is 10, this is what you do with 10-year-olds, right? And so they don't do the same kind of hierarchy of young people. They try to give young people experiences they think they can handle. I also will point out that the whole process of gifted and talentedness is linked to the work of Lewis Terman, who brought the Stanford Binet intelligence test, which started out as a French test, brought it to the US. And Terman began studying groups of youngsters for, quote, giftedness. Now, what's problematic about what he did is there are no Black kids in all of his samples. There's thousands of kids, not one Black kid. There are no Latinx kids in his samples. There are no indigenous kids. So right from the beginning, we've built a program of gifted and talented on the back of a program that never included the kids that we are now talking about. When I go into schools, one of the questions that I ask teachers often is, which subgroup is the best performing subgroup in American schools? Overwhelmingly, they will tell me kids who are of Asian descent. They might be very specific depending on who goes to their schools. They may say Chinese American kids or Indian, South Asian Indian kids. They then might say white kids. They rarely say Latinx kids, and they almost never say Black kids. But it's kind of a trick question because the answer is Nigerian American kids as a subgroup are doing better than any group. And when I show them that, so if you look, for example, at which kids got into all of the Ivy League schools, for the last 8 or 9 years, they've always been Nigerian American kids. So then the follow-up question is, why didn't these kids come to mind? Well, it could be because we don't have any of those kids. But what I'm suggesting is the circumstances in which kids find themselves really, rather than gifted versus non-gifted, kind of sort out into what I would call school dependent and school independent. Most kids are pretty smart. Most kids have never failed at anything before they come to school. They didn't fail to learn to walk. They didn't fail to learn to talk. They learned a whole language without us. It's in school that this thing called failure is lurking. I actually have my students watch a documentary film called Babies, in which they watch children in their first year from Namibia, Mongolia, Tokyo, and San Francisco. And what they come away with at the end of watching this film is how incredibly similar these children are. So there are the circumstances that we are placing our kids in. Some people talked about opportunities. And the last thing I'll say is, we live in a culture in which we believe people have innate ability. In other cultures, they say, no, it's not innate ability, it's effort. You just have to work hard. So in an effort-based society, when kids are struggling, they say, look, we got to figure out how to get you to work a little harder. So we actually have very different worldviews that then end up slotting our children into these categories. Oh, and incidentally, teachers are good at identifying, quote, giftedness 2 out of 10 times. Parents are good at identifying giftedness 6 out of 10 times. Why? Because they got 2 or 3 kids and they got that one that's so different. I always say that's the one that took apart the clock and made 2 clocks, right? So we know we're not good at doing this, but we keep doing it.
Wow, that was like a mic drop moment. I'm processing. It was amazing. And incredibly insightful. Thank you. I'd like to kind of take some of that and lead us into a conversation about intelligence. And do you all feel that it can be tested and assessed? And what level and evidence of bias have you seen in the various types of testing? And so I'd like to start with Dr. Major, because this is my testing. This is who I go to when I have testing questions.
Well, as a school psychologist, do I feel intelligence tests are biased? Most definitely. They are. Because of the constructs that we put together that so-called measures intelligence. Is not as objective as people would like to think it is. And then what we do with the score, once we do get a score, is very subjective. So you get a score of 72. What does that mean as far as your motivation, your desire, all those other things that impact you, versus a child who has scored at 112? That 112 may have little to no motivation to do anything or to achieve anything other than, you know, what their interests are. So when we put that label on a child because of a score that they obtain, to me is not best practice, but it's what we do because that's the expectation. In order to get this service, you have to fall in this criteria. And this is the criteria that we've established because we think that's what this looks like. When there's so many different levels to intelligence and what makes up intelligence and talent and gifted, in theory, it's great. In reality, we need, or we should have moved beyond that by now.
Why haven't we?
Because the people who make the test and develop the test tend to be largely white males. There's some women that have been pushing their way through, but as far as like from a historical perspective, who's developed those measures, they were all developed by Black white males. And their concept of intelligence and achievement was based on the theories at that time. And that was early 16th century, 17th century concepts.
And I know that when our panelists, when we were convening, a wonder that we had was, why aren't these numbers adding up? When we look at this, the students who are qualified for gifted and talented services in Georgia, I think it's about 10% or so of scholars in Georgia are about gifted. But then when you look at scholars who are in special education programs, it's a drastic difference. And in many districts, they're consumed by Black scholars, by Latinx scholars. And we're wondering, why aren't these numbers adding up? And what are the historical implications of that in play? What are the historical implications of these numbers not adding up?
Sorry to be quick on that, but I think it directly connects with the bias of the tests, that the norm referenced and criterion referenced tests that were originally never designed to really serve Black and brown children or Latinx children very well. And when the Stanford Binet was initially used, I think by Dr. Terman, as Dr. Ladson-Billings was talking about, that was almost 100 years ago. And when that work was done, there was no expectation that children who were not white would do well, or there was no thinking around, oh, we should test them too. There was just an expectation and such a bias that those children would not do well. So there was no thought of including them. And I think we've gotten better than that, but only just better than that. And too many of our children who are Black and brown or Latinx are still, they don't see themselves in those tests. I think sometimes they're more likely to do well on tests that aren't verbal, like the Torrance or the NNAT, that aren't bound by language and previous experience so much. That's my initial reaction to that it's connected to bias, testing bias.
Again, let me give you two international examples. There's an island in the Caribbean called Montserrat. Most of the population is Black, and it has volcanoes. And they knew that the volcano was going to erupt about 30 years ago, and it would probably spill down one side of the island. So the people on that side of the island had to make a decision. They knew they would have to leave. And they thought, well, the closest place to go is America. But the place that probably makes the most sense for our kids is the United Kingdom, because we've been using their curriculum. So that's what they did. So there was a bunch of families, they moved to the United Kingdom, and it turned out that they were a full year ahead of their white United Kingdom classmates. The district decided they're a problem. So, in my mind, if you're behind, you're a problem. And if you're ahead, you're a problem. Obviously, you're just a problem, right? Mm. The other story is also a United Kingdom story that this city school district in London did some testing of children early, like kindergarten, first grade kids. They had come up with a test. They did the test. The best performers on the test were the little Black boys in the district. The school board said there's something wrong with that test. So if you can never win, no matter what the test is, and in terms of our own, how our kids are performing, we know that 75% of African-American children in the United States who are deemed eligible for an AP class, and that eligibility comes as a result of their performance on the PSAT. 75% of them never take not one AP test. One AP class. They're qualified. This is not lobbying for them. This is not special pleading. This is not some form of affirmative action. They have qualified to go into AP. They never take an AP class, 75% of them. Now, some of them don't take them because they're in schools that don't offer any AP. Their schools are just in that bad a shape. But a lot of them are discouraged from going into AP as if, well, you're not going to get a 4 on the AP test, so you shouldn't do it. So there is a constant discouragement. And then the last thing I'll say is what we tend to test or assess in schools is very limited to, for the most part, verbal and analytic, right? So reading, math, types of things. People are smart in all kinds of ways. People are smart. They're musically smart. People are artistically smart. People are smart with their bodies. People have really good social skills. And I have my youngest son works in Silicon Valley, and he will tell you, I wish they had some people had some better social skills, because he said these people are stupid. They can code, but they can't even carry on a conversation. So there are ways in which human beings are smart. They wouldn't be able to live, they would not exist if they weren't smart. Every society has its own technologies. But schools are not equipped to assess all those different ways in which our young people are smart. Sure, we have football teams, we have basketball. We know they're good with their bodies. It's just that the reward is a different kind of reward than if how you perform on end of course exams or standardized exams or exams that get you into gifted and talented programs.
So Dr. Ladson-Billings, a question that's percolating in my mind is, I know you said you're well-traveled, you've been in different states and internationally, you've been all over the world. I'm wondering, how does mastery look internationally? We talk about mastery in the States with assessments and with formative and summative assessments, but what does it look like across the country?
Well, I'll give you 2 examples. Well, Sweden and Japan that come to mind. And in those instances, they don't even have something known as retention. If you're 8, you have to go where all the 8-year-olds go and be ready to go with the 9-year-olds. So that means that the students who are lagging actually get more attention because they cannot be held back. They just can't. Now, our system would explode if we put a lot of attention into the kids who are lagging. There's too much influence of folks at the top saying, you're not going to leave my kid behind. My kid's bright, my kid's gifted, my kid's this. It's funny because I live in a place, Madison, Wisconsin, it's like Lake Wobegon, everybody gifted, everybody, I've yet to meet a kid who wasn't gifted in Madison. So it's interesting to me that you can have systems whose desire is to not let kids lag, not let kids be left behind. And we have a system in which we like to string them out. We like to say, okay, here's the best. We give them numbers and rankings when they come out of high school. We constantly are mesmerized by the numbers. And because of that, we try to fit everything into, we try to mathematize almost everything.
I don't know if we're all just processing. They were all taking a moment.
We are. I want to go back to the question you asked Dr. Major. Why are we still using some of these measures? And I'll be honest, Corey, I do feel like it's because we haven't been radical enough with asking about change. I mean, I read articles and I'm kind of outraged when the state of New York talks about discontinuing services because of the segregation, because you don't see brown and, Black kids qualifying for services. But I really think it comes down to us. If we are not continuing to put this at the forefront and to have the courageous and the difficult conversations, I don't think anything will change. And I think it's okay to have a conversation with your colleague and for your opinions not to be the same. I think it's a way for you to look through somebody else's lens and for them to hopefully to be empathetic and try to look through your lens as well. We were having I won't say it was heated, but we went even into talking about the reading wars. And I'm like, okay, this came up in like 2000 National Reading Panel. Now we're coming back again. We talked about all of the different presidents that have put a focus on literacy. And we really need to continue to have the conversations to say, why are we not changing this? Why are we using antiquated measures that did not include children of color? I feel like we have to keep this conversation going if we are going to affect change in this area, because we need to take a look at the measures. I mean, I got excited when I was teaching. I'm like, ooh, Howard Gardner, and he talked about multiple intelligences. And even when I did anecdotal notes and records on kids, I think teachers have relied so much on standardized measures where we have almost taken some of that ownership and autonomy from them to say, no, you can do observation on children. What does that look like when they're working? What does that look like when they're engaged in groups? What is their conversation like? But I think we've relied on some of those measures, and so that's what we use. And I think having the conversation and doing things like this and having the conversation with our colleagues also, because I think some of them are maybe closed-minded and maybe not as open, but still to continue, I'll say to push a little bit, but to, kind of be gentle with it, to have a graceful conversation about it, but still to allow them to know that there is some bias and there are some things that we need to change in the area of the standardized testing when we're looking at students qualifying for services.
Can I just also say that I think we do our teachers a disservice when we don't allow them to really think. We just tell them, do this. This test is due on this day. I often ask this question of math teachers, and that is, how many math problems does a student have to do before you believe that student understands the concept that's embedded in the problem? Can I tell you that there's no agreement, and I'll say, do they have to do all of, problem sets 2, 7, 2, 4, and 8, the ones that don't have the answers in the back of the book, do they have to do 40 of those problems? Or could they do 4? And, when I say that, people's going, what? I said, no, really, could they do, if they did 4 binomial equations, could you assess how they did those 4 and say they understand this? Or they have to do all of them on that page because that's what's in the book. And I just, again, using an international experience, when I look at the Japanese lesson study, sometimes they do 1 problem in the entire math, but by the time the problem has been done, the kids, they can explain it, They know every aspect of it. They can raise questions about it. They understand the problem. We tend to keep doing kind of rote stuff. Can you remember these things? And so if I just feel like if we could step back and allow teachers to really do the intellectual work of teaching as opposed of the sort of mandatory rote work, I think we get better results.
I was trying to say that I didn't want us to harp on one question for a really long time, but I think they're calling it the Great Reset. I'm not very media savvy, but I think they're calling, like post-COVID, the Great Reset. But I was hopeful when the first of our children first went back into the building after COVID, and there were some kids going 2 days a week this week, and there were some kids going 3 days a week the next week, and there were some kids going on the weekend. We were flexing because in Atlanta public schools, we said there should be a percentage based on capacity. There can be a percentage of this number of people in the building at a time. Well, then we thought about who could come in. And in my gifted mind, I hope that would mean instead of school. So I know that we're talking about race, we're talking about intelligence, we're talking about giftedness, but we're talking about educating children. And really, if I can just skip to the good part, I don't even know if the 3 different categories, if the identifications are even necessary anymore. Because what I hope to see in that, in having the problem of COVID to solve and the need for space and true differentiation, even if based on capacity, was that schools would begin to look more like sieves than conveyor belts. Because if the school could genuinely be the connecting place in our communities where everybody went when they needed to go for the purpose that they needed to be there. Like, I think that we learned there's a large number, actually based on the number of families who have not returned to in-person education, who are choosing, like, they never knew they could do it before. They knew they didn't love everything about their school, but they just didn't have a way to separate from the majority philosophy about what education is. Because what a lot of families have learned is, hey, I like having my kid at home. I like the flexibility that provides. And so we just need a little support from you. So in saying what I'm saying, I really hope that we might be able to allow the school to become a resource center for students. And if they were interested in learning, because the other thing to add on top of how I thought about the facility could change to support the needs of each community, I also thought about this. Forgive me if I offend any of you, but this whole notion of COVID learning loss, I totally disagree. I totally disagree, because for gifted, high achieving, and those little special babies who, the kids, they irritate the teacher, their parents ask too many questions, they're socially awkward. And really the educational system does those children more harm than good, because even we adults and the system, we pick on those little kids. And so when they were at home and it could just become about doing the work, they were set free. They were set free to learn what they wanted to learn. If I were a child in school, I wouldn't a bit more want to go than the man on the moon, because these days we don't need school to tell us anything. We have children who are YouTube sensations, social media phenoms. They are business owners. They are inventors. They are go about doing the thing. So why do I need to sit in front of you for you to tell me to read some story in a book that I can't see why it fits to my life? And so my personal belief, Mr. Gray and others who are responsible for tonight, we really should be helping students learn what they want to learn to achieve their personal learning goals. And then we kind of remove that special education, gifted, ESOL, all of those things, because we become collaborators in helping them achieve their goals. They can watch a YouTube video. I do it all the time. I teach myself anything I want to know. I teach myself. So then we know that we could give students the skills that they need to acquire information, to help them process it, to make them make connections, to do all of those things. And so You say, why haven't we? Why haven't we? Why haven't we? Because we don't have the courage. We don't have the infrastructure. There is that they out there, and I don't know who they are. You know, the pipeline to prison, the hold the people down, the take away the privilege. I don't know what the conspiracy theory is or who the they is or whatever. We haven't turned the system upside down. I think because for all these years we've just kind of been going along with it. We don't have the courage to flip it upside down, because other than a situation like COVID, nor has there been a pause button long enough for us to really get far, far, far away from what we know that ritual and routine is about, just kind of going along. And so I had hoped that in COVID. And when I saw the first teacher or heard the first teacher complain about their paper allotment at the copier, I was like, oh Lord, here we go. We're right back to where we started from. We didn't use this time to reevaluate what education could look like for children, or for teachers for that matter, because on the flip side of exactly what I'm saying, we saw how many educators have stepped away from the profession to become business owners or stay-at-home people. I started sewing every day in COVID. Someone said, what's your guilty pleasure? All I want to do is sew. Because in COVID, when we were home, I sewed before, but now I sew every day. Well, I don't sew every day because I'm back to what life looks like. But if I could just sew, I don't want to sew for a living, but I want to sew every day. It's what I want to do. And so in creating a flexible environment for educators, what does it look like if I only need to work 3 days a week? What does that look like for me as a person, where then I could bring joy and excitement and skills and capability and insight and passion and all of that to the learning environment for those children who were in front of me? And so I think that in where we are now, kind of right back to the rudimentary function of it all, I think we've missed a tremendous opportunity that COVID gave us to reset what education looks like. But we won't. And let's not forget the politics and the economics of it all, and that our failure and ignorance is beneficial, just like our sickness in our food and the healthcare industry. We're more profitable to our country as sick people, not as well people. So let's keep them ignorant while we got them sick. I mean,
Well, Ms. Haygood, you have said a mouthful, and I will tell you, I did write a paper called "I'm Here for the Hard Reset," and I used the analogy of our mobile devices. When they go screwy on us, and then we end up at the store with somebody 17 years old in a T-shirt telling us, "You're probably going to need a hard reset." Essentially, what they're saying is, we're going to start all over with this phone. And it's not an idea that, I wish I could say I came up with it on my own, but I looked back in history at when there have been catastrophic events in countries. What did they do? Just you look at post-war Japan, post-war Italy, both did some major restructuring and shifts to their education systems. We have a microcosm of that in post-Katrina. And the people like you and I, the education established people were like, let's get back to normal. Well, anybody knew anything about schools in New Orleans know that nobody should want to go back to that. And the community was like, we don't want that. But what they came up with is not something that I think is beneficial. Essentially, they don't have a public school system now. They, and that's about to happen in Houston. The Texas Education Agency has just taken over the city of Houston schools, and so that's gonna, they're gonna farm them out to educational management organizations like KIPP and Little Red Schoolhouse and whatever. They're gonna put inexperienced people there. So I know that will happen. I, like you, think we had an opportunity at COVID. This is a 100-year occurrence. And it was really an opportunity for us to just stop and rethink. I'm encouraged to hear that you actually started in Atlanta with a couple days, because most people just open up the doors and just said, come on back to school.
Mhm.
What has happened as a result of that? We have seen more fighting in our schools. My middle son is a teacher, high school teacher in the Sacramento, California area. He said, Mom, our schools were great. I loved working in these schools. He said, but since we've come back, we've had lockdowns, we've had kids bringing weapons because our kids have been traumatized. And we haven't thought of a way to think, to bring them back. The other thing that I've been saying to folks, I sit on a lot of nonprofit boards, United Way, Urban League, Madison Children's Museum. I'm the nonprofit queen. And I've essentially said, we have to stop saying after school. There is no after school. I mean, one of the things that COVID taught us is that time is fungible, right? Many of us were working well into 9 o'clock, and high school kids love that because they don't like to get up in the morning anyway. So it was perfect for them. But what I was saying to these nonprofits, instead of waiting for the kids to come to you, connect with these schools and say, how can we push in the schools? Maybe you don't need to have 28 kids in your classroom. Maybe you need to have half that amount and let us have the other half. So work with the group in the Sacramento Area Youth Speaks that does spoken word stuff. They said, we stopped waiting for kids to come to our program after school. We started showing up at schools, working with English teachers saying, let us have half of these kids. And then I love that you have identified what I think is also another misnomer, learning loss. I've got a list of things that I don't say, one of which is at risk. It's like my friend Margaret Beal Spencer from the University of Chicago says, to be human is to be at risk. Okay, I'm at risk for high blood pressure, hypertension, high cholesterol, diabetes. I didn't want nobody to introduce me that way. Okay, here's the at-risk professor. Okay, but that's the way we talk about these babies at 5, and they're supposed to carry that label until they're in 12th grade. Our kids' learning loss is incorrect just cognitively. The brain does not lose learning unless you've had traumatic brain injury or dementia. Now, did they learn something different than what we wanted to teach them? Yes, but they were learning nonetheless. And so I think we do have to work on our language and the way in which we address some of the things that we're looking at. I am so fearful that we will just squander this opportunity. There's an Indian novelist by the name of Arundhati Roy that I quote a lot because she says, the pandemic really is a portal. She says it's a gateway between the old world and the new. And we can enter the new carrying all this garbage with us, or we can go in her words, with light luggage, ready to imagine a new world and to fight for it. And that's really where I think we have an obligation, is to fight for this new world.
Ooh. Okay, I think we all can take a collective deep breath. This was, okay. Thank you all so much. So as we think about tonight, this conversation, and we have 2 minutes on the clock, so just to give us that insight, what's your final word or your final thought from tonight?
I don't want to hog the airtime, but might I share my screen?
Yes. Does it allow you to?
Let me see. I don't know how to, let me see. Yes, it will.
Okay.
Are you able to see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I think the last question was what would you like to see in education, right? And this is something that I feel really, really strongly about that aligns with my previous comments. And I just believe in a strengths-based education. So for those of you who don't know, several years ago, under a previous superintendent, all of the employees in Atlanta Public Schools were given access or were surveyed using the Gallup poll about what are our strengths. And we were supposed to become a strengths-based culture. Well, my strengths are adaptability, positivity, responsibility, ideation, and strategic. And so it talks about how in the organization, we should leverage our strengths. Because my strengths are mine, David's strengths are not weaknesses. And because he and I don't possess the same strengths, neither of the ones that we don't share are weaknesses. His are his, and I should leverage his in collaboration with mine and Mr. Gray's and all the people to make sure that everyone is using their strengths to put us ahead, right? And so I thought, well, why don't we know what the children's strengths are? Because as we move forward as a society, and you all do not misunderstand me, I think that it is critically important for students to learn how to read, write, and compute using the gray matter in their heads, to whatever degree that they can. But we've all used Siri and Alexa and many of the other technologies to assist us with that. So some of that, students just need to leverage the use of technology for the purposes that they see fit. So why aren't we having a strengths-based culture for our students? And so somewhere in education, you all believe, and in particular, what I think education should become for all students. We see our students at the bottom of some hole. And I think we think that they have to, if you imagine where the man is in red, there's this stairwell where he's coming up out of the hole. We think students have to go 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, 4 step, kind of dummied down way out of the hole. But I don't believe that. I think we just need to give kids a ladder. You know, if students have organic problems to solve and they learn how to work to solve those problems, they will acquire the skills that they need to read, write, and compute. And that is ladder building across the gap, not us trying to reach them at the bottom of a hole to pull them out of. So I just think that when we, I always hate to say differentiation because it's such a, you know, a buzzword, whatever we want to call it about it. But I really do believe organic learning experiences is kind of where we need to be in order to give every student what they need to be successful to the degree that they need to be successful for themselves. And so that's my little soapbox about getting our babies out of the hole. That's what I personally believe. That's what I hope for. I would love to see a day in the 48 months, 8 semesters that I have remaining in my career in public service, because the day that I can go, I will get my little pocketbook and ride off into the sewing machine, but into the future. But if I could see anything in the time that I have remaining, that is, you know, having it be where students have a chance to just engage in the most authentic way that we can provide for them.
That was really insightful. And I think you did a great job of summing up essentially what everyone on the panel was saying. It's time to reimagine, and we're the people for the job. All these faces here, all the ones who are watching, and then everyone we come into contact with. We really, really are grateful to each of our panelists for your time, for your insight. I know I'm walking away so much more informed than when I logged in. And I've got some articles to read, some books to read, some discussions to be had. And just from each of us, the students of UGA, we just want to thank you all for your time. And
thank you for having me.
Wish you an amazing evening.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Opportunity.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hopefully we all have a next step that we can an actionable step that we can take to further this work, because this discussion is great, but if we don't do anything behind it, then we're still not doing the reset like we all talked about. So thank you. We love you. We are so grateful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, and if you were watching this, you should have been here because this was amazing. Stop the recording now.